Hi guys, today we're going to talk about the digestive system. It's chapter 16 in the Salvo book, Practice and Principles. But before we start on that, I want you to go ahead and get your anatomy and physiology journal. You're going to put this in the digestive system. So for me, that's page 48. Again, the digestive system, page 48 in your anatomy and physiology journal. So the first thing that we do is medical terminology. The digestive system has quite a bit, as you can see, and it's divided up into oral cavity, the small intestine, the large intestine, and then there's accessories or additional med terms. So let's get started on that. The first, and you can divide it up into columns like I did. I did mine like this, but on the first half of one page, because there will be more. So, okay, the oral cavity, dent O and odont O means teeth, both of them. So to describe medical terminology, you have a root word such as dent, D-E-N-T, and then when you're spelling it out in anatomical terms for trying to decipher the word, you would put a backslash, and then your connecting form is the O. Sometimes you'll see a connecting form of E or an A, but most of the time we see an O. So orthodontist, gingivitis on the next one. So ginge backslash O is the root word, and then gingivitis would be inflammation of the gums. Gloss O and ling O both mean the tongue. So glossopharyngeo, or it's easier to think of linguistics, L-I-N-G, linguistics, the study of language or things of the tongue. Or O and stomato both mean mouth. So I just noticed, I apologize. So stomat, there should be a T after the S-T-O-M-A-T backslash O. Stomato is mouth. Taro is saliva. Silo is salivary gland. Esophage O, esophagus. Pharynge O is the pharynx. Gastro for stomach. Pyloro for pylorus. Then we move into the small intestine. Duodeno for duodenum. Entero, small intestine. Jejunum for jejunum. This is the second part of the small intestine. And ileo for ileum is the third part of the small intestine. The small intestine wraps and coils all the way around until it gets down to the large intestine, but the second part we label as the jejunum, and then towards the end, closer to the colon, is the ileum. Large intestine, append O or appendic O, is your appendix. It's right where the small intestine meets into the large is the appendix and the cecum. We'll show that in a different slide. Colo and colon O means colon. Colonectomy, for example, is the removal of the colon. Procto means anus or rectum. Pecto is just the rectum. And sigmoid O is the sigmoid colon. So additional things or accessory glands, cholangio is the bile duct, which is a part of the small intestine portion of the bile duct. And then here's an E, combining form E means bile or gall. Cholesto is the gallbladder. Cold octo is the bile duct. Hepato is liver. And pancreato is pancreas. Additional med terms that would be good to know for the digestive system. So these are suffixes. You'll see suffixes with a dash and then the word. So algia and dynia is pain. Emesis is vomiting. Megaly, enlargement. Orexia, so think of anorexia, is appetite. Ana is without appetite. Pepsia is digestion. Phagia, swallowing or eating. So dysphagia means without swallowing or eating. Rhea is discharge or flow, so think of diarrhea. Ectomy is an excision or a removal, so colonectomy is the removal or the excision of the colon. Iasis is abnormal condition, as well as osis. Plasty is plastic surgery. If they have to do surgery in an area to improve its function, rather than trying to remove it, it would be plasty. Prandial is mill, and toxic is obviously poison or something that is negative to your body. So those are all the med terms. If you want to put this first section in 3 columns like that, and then you could even do one for suffixes in a different page, but that's not already marked in your table of contents. But you can certainly put them in with the digestive system just underneath the first and then have 2 columns. Okay, the next part of your journal, you'll have 3 columns again. So the anatomy is the oral cavity, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine. Your accessory structures are the pancreas, liver, and gallbladder. Again, this is part of your journal, so you'll write these in. You can write them in 3 sections on 1 page. Physiology, the function or the purpose of the digestive system is ingestion. You're actually taking it into your body. Digestion, mechanical. It's the actual breaking down of substances. Absorption in the GI tract goes to the bloodstream, and then that goes into the cells of our body. So absorption. And then defecation or elimination. If we look at the body and we divide it into 4 sections, so the left upper, the right upper, the left lower, and the right lower, and then midline. So in this section we have liver and gallbladder. Across the midline is the spleen. Come back down, the appendix and the cecum. Again, that's where the small intestine meets into the large intestine, but it attaches with the appendix, and then underneath that is a little pocket, like a gland of the cecum. And then the large intestine wraps around to the midline and then comes back down. So you have ascending colon, and then across the midline is the transverse colon, and then coming down is the descending colon and attaches to the sigmoid colon, which looks like a little S, and that attaches to the rectum. Okay, so the sequence of your digestive system, you'll need to know this for your test. So put it in a way that makes sense to you, but practice this sequence over and over again. So we start off with the mouth, then it goes to the pharynx, to the esophagus, to the stomach. You can hear this in 2 different ways, duodenum or duodenum. You'll hear it both ways. Small intestine, again the jejunum and the ileum. And then I have the colon, but I put these orange arrows going around to show the ascending colon. The transverse colon sits on top of the small intestine. And then the descending colon attaches to the sigmoid colon, and then to the anus and the rectum. You'll want to know this sequence. Practice it over and over again. Okay, the objectives: to discuss the peritoneum, identify specific divisions of the gastrointestinal tract, including the oral cavity, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, and small and large intestine. Name accessory glands of digestion and discuss their functions. Name types of pathologic conditions of the gastrointestinal tract and give the massage considerations for each. The introduction breaks down the digestive system breaks down molecules into a state easily used by cells. It's like an assembly line. The tube is called the GI tract or the gastrointestinal tract, and then the alimentary canal. It starts at the mouth and it ends at the anus. Digestion is initiated by a parasympathetic nervous system. It's also known as rest and digest. Rest and digest, the parasympathetic nervous system. Remember, the other is the sympathetic nervous system, and it is fight or flight. The parasympathetic is rest and digest. Stress and emotion responses slow the digestion because they stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, and that overrides the parasympathetic nervous system. Here's another graphic of the anatomy: oral cavity, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, pancreas, liver, gallbladder. You should recognize that from your journal entry. Here you have a diagram of that. You can see here what I was trying to tell you about the large intestine or the colon. It comes up, all the way up to the gallbladder. It wraps all the way up behind the stomach and into the spleen. And then it curves down. This little S part at the bottom here, after the descending colon, that little S is the sigmoid colon, and then to the rectum, and then to the anus. The physiology or the function: ingestion, process of orally taking in materials; digestion, mechanical and chemical responses that break down food into simple molecules. So here we have more of a definition of mechanical digestion. Please enter this into your A&P books. This will be something you will definitely want to know. Mechanical digestion is chewing, churning, and peristalsis, or the movement, the muscular contractions around the small and large intestine to push the bolus or the food through the system. Mechanical digestion: chewing, churning, and peristalsis. Chemical digestion is the effects of acids, bases, and enzymes that break down the bolus or your food. Absorption: movement of simple molecules from the digestive tract, bloodstream or lymph vessels, and then into your body cells. Defecation: eliminating ingestible or unabsorbed materials. Peristalsis is the rhythmic contraction of the GI tract to mix and propel products of digestion. So here's the bolus or your food. It's trying to move through. It has these rhythmic contractions to push the bolus through your system. The peritoneum is the large serous membrane located in the abdomen. There's two main parts. On the next slide, there's a diagram, so hang in there with me. There's two main parts. Parietal lies against interior body wall, and then the visceral surrounds your abdominal organs. You have serous fluid that lies between the two layers, which lubricates it and it allows it to slide. Without that, it would get too hot and it would rip. Retroperitoneal, so retro means behind. Retroperitoneal is with the kidneys and the pancreas. So here's a diagram that shows what we were talking about. Here's the retroperitoneal space. The duodenum, this is if you were cut straight down the midline. And you can identify the colors of the peritoneum by the different, the colors will indicate the different areas of layers. Sections include the mesenteries, the greater omentum, and the lesser omentum. Okay, so first let's talk about the oral cavity. It's the first portion of the GI tract. It contains the tongue, teeth, gums, and the opening for your salivary glands. Continuing with the oral cavity, this is where food is chewed. So starting the mechanical process, chewing or mastication. Chewing is aided by the tongue. Chewed food becomes a soft ball or bolus. Food is then swallowed, so swallowing, deglutination. Now we're with the tongue. The tongue is a large, strong muscle that mixes food with saliva. It directs the food or bolus toward the back of your throat. The tongue contains taste buds or receptors called gustatory organs. You can write that in your journals where we have tongue, or you can add the tongue actually into the mouth section. You can add tongue and teeth, but for the tongue, it's a gustatory organ. The primary tastes are sweet, sour, bitter, salt, and savory. Taste is the response of many receptors, not just the ones on the tongue. Smell plays a significant role in taste. Your teeth, still in the mouth, are used to bite off and break up larger pieces of food into smaller ones. For adults, we have 32 secondary or permanent teeth. Children have 20 primary deciduous teeth, which they usually shed between the ages of 6 to 12 years of age. They're classified by their shape or their function. We have the incisors, the cuspids or canines, bicuspids or premolars, and multicuspids, which are molars. The third molars are called wisdom teeth. Salivary glands and secretions, there's 3 pairs. Submandibular, so under your jawline, sublingual, and parotoid, which is the largest. Sublingual would be under the tongue. Saliva is clear, viscous fluid that keeps oral mucosa moist and lubricates your food. Salivary amylase is the digestive enzyme found in saliva, breaks down carbohydrates. The enzyme is the catalyst that accelerates chemical reactions. Lingual lipase is secreted by glands near the tongue and break down lipids into glycerol and fatty acids. And then the pharynx receives bolus from mouth and moves it to the esophagus during chewing. It's also called the throat. So from the pharynx, you can divide that, just like we did with the mouth, with the tongue and teeth and glands. You can also do that with the pharynx and divide it into 3 sections. The nasopharynx is the upper region that contains openings to the eustachian tubes. This is why you get middle ear infections, especially in young kids. That tube is really small, and it goes from your pharynx, where the bolus is, or where your nose drains, and it goes up into the middle ear, causing congestion inside the ear. Naso is your nose. Pharynx is within your throat. So nasopharynx is the upper region and contains openings to the eustachian tubes. Oropharynx is the portion you can see, and it contains your tonsils. Oro, again, is mouth, and then the pharynx is the throat, so it's where the 2 meet. Laryngopharynx is the lower portion, and it ends at the esophagus. This is where your vocal folds are, and helps produce our speech and our sound. Esophagus is the muscular tube from the pharynx to the stomach. It produces mucus. You'll want to know this, so if you want to write this in your journal, put a star on whatever notes you're taking. The lower esophageal sphincter, LES, is between the esophagus and the stomach. Sphincters are small circular muscles that go around tubes in our body, and they help stop things from going too fast down our digestive system or opening up when it's time, when the pressure has relaxed it to open. So here we have the stomach. It's J-shaped, looks like a sac. The enlargement of the GI tract is bound at both ends by sphincters. The LES sphincter between esophagus and stomach, and then the pyloric sphincter. Hopefully you recognize that med term, pyloric sphincter, between the stomach and the small intestine, or the duodenum. So if you look at the graphic, you have the esophagus and then the LES, the lower esophageal sphincter. It goes into the stomach. The upper part is called the fundus, and then you have a lesser curvature. You have the pylorus towards the end, and then you're going into the pyloric canal. That's where that second sphincter is, the pyloric sphincter. Once the bolus comes through and pushes through this sphincter, it goes down into the duodenum or duodenum. The stomach receives bolus and breaks it down into chyme. Chyme is the semi-liquid substance. It contains rugae, which are folds in the lining, which allows the stomach to expand. So remember, anytime we have those folds, once they push out, it increases the surface area of whatever organ we're talking about. Absorbed substances are water, some minerals, alcohols absorbed, and some medications. There's secretions from gastrin, hyaluronic acid, and the intrinsic factor, and pepsogenin. Gastrin is produced by G cells, initiates secretion of gastric juice, stimulates bile and pancreatic enzyme emissions into the small intestine. Hydrochloric acid is produced by parietal cells. It breaks down protein, kills bacteria and other pathogens. The intrinsic factor is produced by parietal cells again, required for vitamin B12 absorption. Pepsinogen is produced by chief cells, begins protein digestion, becomes pepsin when mixed with hydrochloric acid. Into the small intestine, we have the largest portion of the GI tract. It's a coiled tube at both ends by sphincters. The pyloric sphincter, which we just discussed, goes between the pyloric section of the stomach and then the duodenum. The ileocecal sphincter is between the large and small intestine. The ileum is the lowest part of the small intestine, and the cecal is the cecum, which is that little area that is attached as part of the large intestine, but we don't hear about it much. There's 3 sections of the small intestine. You have the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. It contains structures to increase the surface area. The plicae circularis, the circular folds, and the villi are finger-like projections that house blood and lymph capillaries. The microvilli are finger-like projections on the villi. So the small intestinal wall, if we were to look just at that tissue, has goblet cells which produce mucus, and it's found in between the projections of villi. And then the lacteals, if you remember from the lymph system, those that were here last mod, the lymph capillaries within the villi assist with fat absorption. So if we look at absorption rates, 90% of absorption occurs in the small intestine, whereas 10% are in the stomach and large intestine. This graph shows where the absorption happens. So you can see calcium and magnesium and iron, alcohol, 20% of the total, and aspirin is all in the stomach. The small intestine, we have glucose, amino acids, fats, fat-soluble vitamins, water-soluble vitamins, alcohol, water, vitamin B12, sodium, and potassium. So this is why I wanted you to write down those charts where you can, so that you can see where some of these vitamins and minerals are being absorbed. The large intestine, absorption is sodium and potassium again, the majority of water, and acids and gases. Whatever is not absorbed then turns into feces. Small intestine sections, you have the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. The duodenum contains ducts from liver, gallbladder, and the pancreas. So those ducts release their acids in to help break down the food. It has major duodenal papilla right at the juncture of the pancreas and common bile ducts. There's also a sphincter here that regulates the flow of secretions, the sphincter of Oddi. The jejunum is the middle section of the small intestine, and then the lower section is the ileum. It's the last section. It terminates at the ileocecal sphincter, and it contains numerous lacteals. The secretions of the small intestine, the enterokinase promotes secretion of pancreatic enzymes. The peptase is promotion of protein digestion. Maltase, sucrase, and lactase promotes chemical or carbohydrate digestion. Endocrinin promotes flow of intestinal juices. Then we have cholecystokinin, stimulates contraction of the gallbladder and flow of the pancreatic enzymes. And secretin stimulates pancreas to secrete liquid that neutralizes chyme, facilitating enzymic action. Now we're down at the large intestine. Again, it's bound at both ends by sphincters. You have the ileocecal sphincter, which, as we discussed before, goes between the ileum, the lower section of the small intestine, and the cecum. And then you have the anal sphincter, which is at the end of the line. The large intestine absorbs water and electrolytes. This is why if you have your colon removed, such as yours truly, you could have significant issues with dehydration. And you can also have what's called dumping syndrome, because your body cannot absorb the nutrients fast enough, the electrolytes fast enough. And so dumping syndrome is when the feces comes through without being able to get bulked. So you become extremely dehydrated from that because you're not able to retain any of the nutrients. Taenia coli is thick longitudinal bands resembling thread-like fabric. Then you have the haustra, which is pouches that are formed by the Taenia coli. They contract to push contents to the next one, and it keeps going down, that peristalsis effect. It consists of the cecum, the ascending colon, which again comes up from the cecum and goes towards the liver, and the gallbladder. Transverse goes across your midline and goes up in behind the spleen. And then the descending goes down the side, the lateral side on your right. on your left, on the left, and then your sigmoid colon, which then is attached to the rectum, and then the anus. So here we have another picture of it. So we have the cecum. Here's the ending of the ileum. It opens here. You have your cecum, and then the appendix. This whole area here contains lymphatic tissue. Then you have the ascending colon. That little curve right at the top of the ascending colon is called the hepatic or the right colonic flexure. You need to write this down because you have two flexures in the colon, and you'll want to know which one is which. Hepatic means liver. H-E-P-A-T is your root word, which means liver. Hepatic, so it's next to the liver. Then the transverse colon from the hepatic flexure to the splenic flexure, which is at the left colonic area. The splenic, so that means it's up by the spleen. So hepatic is liver. It's on your right side. Splenic flexure is next to the spleen, and it's on the left side. Then descending from the hepatic flexure, descending from the splenic flexure to the sigmoid flexure. So if we go down this next curve, is going to be the sigmoid colon. So if you look at this graphic, you can see it has this S shape, or kind of actually, looks like a Z in a way. The splenic flexure comes down into the rectum and then to the anus. This tissue here that has the arteries and veins and a lot of lymph nodes, the tissue that holds all of that is called the flora. And I'll have you watch some videos about the flora. It's pretty amazing. Okay, so defecation, the rectum fills with feces. The anal sphincter descends, causing defecation reflex. Feces is then eliminated. Feces is also called stool. The mucus within the large intestine allows developing feces to move more easily. It does not produce digestive enzymes. It just allows the feces to move through so you don't get fissures, which are cuts into tissue. The accessory organs to the digestive system consist of the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. Produce a substance that aid in digestion. All of those substances enter into the duodenum. So here's the liver, and then the spleen is over on the left side. The stomach sits generally on that left side as a J shape. The pancreas sits behind that. And you can barely see these little ducts. They're colored green. You have the hepatic duct, the common bile duct, and then the pancreatic duct. And they all enter into the duodenum, the little C-shaped part of the stomach, into which starts the small intestine. The liver is the largest internal organ. It weighs approximately 3 pounds. Again, the liver is the largest internal organ. It lies beneath the diaphragm. The diaphragm is the muscle that goes from one side of your ribs to the other and divides your respiratory system from your digestive system and the other organs that are in your abdominal cavity. Most complex internal organ, the liver, provides many important functions, including metabolizes amino acids, stores glucose and glycogen, stores fat, produces plasma proteins and fibrinogens, produces antibodies, stores nutrients, iron, copper, vitamins A, B12, D, E, and K. So in your journals where you wrote down your vitamin and minerals, you can put a little red star or highlight that area to show that all of those areas are stored in the liver. Detoxifies blood by removing toxins, drugs, and hormones. Destroys old red blood cells and platelets. The secretions produce bile. It emulsifies fat and changes it from large fat globulates into smaller ones. This increases the surface area, promoting effectiveness of fat digestive enzymes. Now we're going to talk about the gallbladder. It's a pear-shaped sac. It's located beneath the liver. It stores and concentrates bile that's produced by the liver. The sphincter of Oddi controls the release of the bile into the, that's right, the duodenum. And then the pancreas. It's carrot-shaped. It's located behind the stomach. It's the most important digestive gland. The pancreatic enzymes break down all foods, proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Trypsinogen breaks down proteins, becomes trypsin when mixed with endocrine in the small intestine. Chymotrypsin breaks down proteins, and carboxypeptidase breaks down proteins. Pancreatic amylase converts polysaccharides into disaccharides, for example, the maltose, sucrose, and lactose. And the pancreatic lipase converts fats into fatty acids. So this is the end of the digestive tract PowerPoint. What I suggest that you do is you look at your journal, you make sure you write everything down that you feel like you need, go through this PowerPoint a couple of times to make sure that you have everything that I've suggested that you put into your journal, and then read through your digestive chapter at the same time that you're going through the PowerPoint. Obviously, the PowerPoint is a summary. Your chapter is going to give you a lot more information. But between the three things, between your journal, the PowerPoint, and your book, if you take time to study all three of them concurrently, you'll be able to understand all the different areas that produce chyme and secretions to help break down. Make sure you understand the difference between digestive and mechanical. I just lost my train of thought. Digestive and mechanical breakdown. Okay, I'll have some extra information for you in your announcements. We'll talk to you guys soon. Okay, so I just did a PowerPoint, Mark.
Okay, hold on. Nope, stay out there. Yeah.
I just did a PowerPoint. So I go from here.
Okay, let me put this on the camera.
Okay.
Okay, you've got it in presentation mode.
Uh-huh.
All right, so go find, now, do you already
So let me
have
do
it?
it. Command. I've already recorded it.